Okay, so we're just going to look at two examples of reducing trig ratios and then simplifying. So in this first example, whenever you have a sum like this, you start by asking yourself, which quadrant are my angles in? So that's the first thing we need to ask. And we go and we look at our cos diagram, which we would remember and write on the side of our page. And we would see, okay, 180 plus theta. There it is in the third quadrant, so this is a third quadrant angle. 360 minus theta in the fourth quadrant, so that's a fourth quadrant angle. And then tan of 180 minus theta, there it is in the second quadrant, so that's a second quadrant angle. Okay, so that's quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4, which you already know. Okay, so we've identified the quadrant, step 1, and now we're going to ask ourselves, is my ratio positive or negative? So let's check. Cos in the third quadrant, well, in the third quadrant tan is positive, which means that cos is negative, so we write negative cos, and we reduce this to our acute angle of theta. Okay. And this is being multiplied by the next thing, tan in the fourth quadrant. If we look at the fourth quadrant, cos is a positive 1, which means that tan is negative. And again, we write negative tan and we reduce it to the acute angle there, the theta. And then finally, at the bottom, we've got tan in the second quadrant. Well, in the second quadrant, you can see that sine is a positive 1, which means that tan has to be negative as well. And again, we reduce it to this little acute angle here of theta. Okay, once we've reduced, we're going to simplify by using algebra. Okay, so if you have one term over one term, you may cancel. If you've got like terms, you may add them. So your algebra rules your trig. So we need to remember our algebra rules. So this is one term at the top, one term at the bottom, which means I'm allowed to cancel. So I may cancel the whole of that tan theta with the whole of that tan theta. Okay, so it divides into their ones and into their ones. Okay, let's look at our signs. We've got a negative times a negative, which is going to give me a positive at the top. Then we've got cos times 1, which will give me cos theta. At the bottom, you've got a negative 1. Okay, positive divided by a negative would give me a negative, and anything divided by 1 would just leave you with a cos theta. All right, number 2. Sine 180 minus beta. Tan 360 minus beta over sine 180 plus beta. Okay, now whether they're alphas, betas, x's, they still are going to be exactly the same, which quadrant they're going to be in. So we normally use theta in the first quadrant, and we've got to remember to write this cos diagram for ourselves so we can see and identify the quadrants. Okay, so step 1 was identify the quadrants. So which quadrants are these in? 180 minus would be in the second quadrant. 360 minus, sorry, I've written plus there. Okay, 360 minus, fourth quadrant. And then 180 plus, well, there we go, is the third quadrant. So identify your quadrants. Check your signs. And then we do our reductions. Okay, so let's check. Sine in the second would be positive. There we go. Sine in the second is positive. So we go positive sine and we reduce it to the acute angle. And in this case, my acute angle is a beta. All right, what about this one? Tan in the fourth. Well, in the fourth quadrant, cos is positive, which means that tan is negative. And we reduce it to the acute angle there of beta. And at the bottom, we've got sine of 180 plus beta, which quadrant? Third. Sine is negative in the third quadrant because tan is positive. And we reduce it to beta. Okay. And once we've done our reductions, then we do our simplification. And we use algebra. Okay, algebra rules. Okay, it's one term over one term, so I am allowed to cancel again. So let's just check. What am I cancelling? Well, I can cancel the whole of that sine beta with the whole of that sine beta. Nothing else cancels. So now we need to work out positive times a negative would give me a negative at the top. And that gives me 1 times tan beta. What's at the bottom? Well, we have a negative 1. Right, a negative divided by a negative would give me a positive, and tan beta over 1 would give me tan beta. And you obviously don't have to write that positive, so we can just write tan beta. It's also fine to do all your signs in one step. So positive times a negative divided by a negative. It's entirely up to you as long as you don't break any of your algebra rules.